Friday the 13th is back. How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and if you like monsters, slashers, pretty much any movie shot during, set during, or inspired by the 1980s, this is the channel for you. In today's video, we are talking about Friday the 13th, which is funny because I looked at the playlist for all of my Friday the 13th videos, and it's been a long time since I got to make a positive video around this franchise. But I'm not even gonna bury the lead here. It looks like we're gonna hear all about this franchise coming back by the end of this year, and it sounds pretty promising. So this is being reported by Bloody Disgusting, which is exactly where you want to see something like this. It's not being reported by like a Twitter leaker or a random source online. This is coming straight from Bloody Disgusting and one of their podcasts under their podcast network, The Boo Crew. So they had Roy Lee, who owns Vertigo Entertainment. He produced Godzilla 2014. He produced Poltergeist remake back in 2015. He did The Boy. It Chapter 1 and 2 he produced. He executive produced Dr. Sleep, which is a super underrated movie. I love it so much. More people need to see Dr. Sleep. The list goes on and on. This dude is both executive produced and produced a ton of stuff in both the horror genre and just movies as a whole. My point is, he's nothing to scoff at. This is a big dude in the movie industry who was just on Bloody Disgusting's Boo Crew podcast, and he just let it slip that by the end of this year, we are going to hear some news on Friday the 13th. Now, this is actually super interesting because back in 2018, Bloody Disgusting reported that Lee's company, Vertigo Entertainment, was teaming up with LeBron James's company, Spring Hill Entertainment, to try and get the rights to Friday the 13th. Of course, all of that kind of got messed up by the lawsuit between Victor Miller and Sean S. Cunningham. Now, the reason this is interesting to me is because back in 2018, Lee's company, Vertigo Entertainment, was teaming up reportedly with Spring Hill Entertainment, which is the company owned by LeBron James. I guess he's a huge Friday the 13th fan, and they were going to work together to like fund and produce a Friday the 13th movie if and when the huge lawsuit between Sean S. Cunningham and Victor Miller ended. And if you don't know the whole story there, I can long story short it pretty quick. Basically, Victor Miller wrote the script for the first Friday the 13th. He came up with Pamela Voorhees, Camp Crystal Lake, Jason Voorhees, and the whole origin story there. He moved on, and then Friday the 13th became a huge franchise. That franchise obviously made a ton of money over the years, and Sean S. Cunningham got to keep the vast majority of that money, and Victor Miller basically saw none of it. So he took advantage of a law that basically says if you write a script, after 35 years, you can regain the rights to that script. And since this lawsuit happened, we've seen Clive Barker regain the rights to movies like Hellraiser. We've seen Stephen King regaining a ton of the rights to his books. We've also seen other movies go back to their rights holders. Like a lot of the stuff Wes Craven worked on went back to his estate, like Nightmare on Elm Street, for example. So this is like a pretty big deal across the board. I mean, this is affecting Disney. Like the people who created Spider-Man are basically suing Disney to regain the rights of these properties so they can make money on all of these movies that Disney is making under the MCU banner. And where that lawsuit ended up the first time was that Victor Miller won. So in the United States, he owns the rights to stuff like Jason Voorhees as a child. He owns Camp Crystal Lake. He also owns Pamela Voorhees, like, you know, really important elements to this franchise. Overseas, it doesn't really affect that, I guess, because this all happened in the US court. So obviously Sean S. Cunningham didn't like that outcome, so he appealed the decision, and it still came down in Victor Miller's favor. So Sean S. Cunningham owns adult Jason Voorhees, and you know, the Jason everyone likes. Victor Miller owns the camp, Pamela Voorhees, kid Jason. So there's a lot of elements being split here, and basically they need to come together to make something happen. I'm sure in real life these dudes probably hate each other now. They need to make a deal because this whole lawsuit in the first place was completely money driven. You know, Victor Miller saw how much money there was in the Friday the 13th franchise, so he sued Sean Cunningham for his piece of the pie. So now if they want to make any money on this franchise, they basically have to come to some sort of agreement, and that's looking like what's going to happen with Vertigo Entertainment. And there's no word in this report at all if Spring Hill is still involved. I'm more obviously excited by Vertigo just based on the stuff that Lee has worked on in the past. There are a ton of great movies there. I mean, he has The Departed. That's incredible. And It Chapter 1, incredible movie. It's a great horror movie. Dr. Sleep is one of the best horror movies of all time, and I will take that to my grave. And I'm sure you've noticed, while movies that he's worked on like The Grudge are over at Sony and The Strangers is at Universal and now somewhere else, he also talked about The Strangers getting 3 more movies, and they're going to have a bigger filmmaker attached to that, which I also think is great because I know it has some fans out there, but I really don't like The Strangers Prey at Night. I think it just is like a John Carpenter emulation that doesn't do a good job of it. Some of the stuff is cool, like the pool scene and I guess the design of the actual strangers themselves, but overall, all, that movie was a mess and it wasn't good enough for how long the gap was between the first one and that second one. I think that franchise could do really well with a really good filmmaker who understands the source material better than Johannes Roberts did. I'm just gonna throw that out there. But for the most part, the vast majority of the horror movies Lee has worked on have been underneath the New Line Cinema's banner at Warner Brothers. Now, of course, there's some weird stuff going on at Warner Brothers. HBO Max is being combined with Discovery Plus. A lot of the movies like Batgirl were canceled. We don't know what's happening with the Conjuring universe and Salem's Lot, for example, which is outside of that universe. It just has talent from those movies working on it with Gary Doberman. We don't know what's going on there. We also don't know what's going on with Evil Dead Rise, but I would think New Line is probably where Friday the 13th will end up. I also think A Nightmare on Elm Street might end up there as well, but the interesting thing here is that it looks like Blumhouse will not be working on Friday the 13th, which is crazy because Jason Blum has talked about for a long time how he's been trying to get both Friday and Nightmare and that he can't get the rights. It seems like the rights are going to end up with Vertigo, and I would guess they're going to sign with New Line Cinema because they've had such a great relationship with them in the past. Now, I guess Vertigo could hire Blumhouse to make this movie for New Line to distribute. I just think that would probably overcomplicate things, but yeah, just looking at the way New Line makes movies, I think this could turn out to be really cool. Of course, the Blumhouse model for Friday the 13th of going with an extremely low budget and giving it to an up-and-coming filmmaker or a filmmaker from outside the genre like David Gordon Green with Halloween, that would be a really cool way to approach it. But one of my favorite Friday the 13th movies is the remake. I think that movie was really cool with a bigger budget, and also Jason Lives has the biggest budget feeling of that franchise. And honestly, ranking all those movies, I'll do a full video on it. I think Jason Lives is probably my favorite Friday the 13th movie. So while I think the best way to make a slasher is for low budget with an up-and-coming filmmaker who has really cool ideas with a ton of practical gore and effects, I think a bigger budget one, sort of a la something like, I don't know, A Quiet Place, the Conjuring movies budgets, Dr. Sleep, It Chapter 1 or It Chapter 2's budgets, that would be a really cool place to see Friday the 13th end up budget-wise. The coolest thing about Friday the 13th is that they can pick up here and the lore is not extremely complicated. Like, as far as Jason goes, for the most part, he died at summer camp. His mom was upset, so she killed a bunch of counselors at the same camp. Jason turned out to be alive and he's just like a zombie who murders camp counselors. It's like pretty simple, so it's easy to modernize. They could also do a period piece and set it during the 90s or even back in the 80s like the original movies. There's so many options here, and there's not really that many ways where I feel like they can piss a ton of fans off. I mean, Vinny DeSanti, he's done some really cool stuff with the fan films, Never Hike Alone, Never Hike in the Snow. Both of those movies had really good fan reception and they're fan films. All they really have to do is get a few basic things right, I think. You know, use practical effects, get Jason Voorhees' look right with the hockey mask, you know, make him look big and scary. Of course, you bring back Kane Hodder to play him, that's a no-brainer. Set it at a summer camp. The time of year I don't think matters too much because as we've seen with Never Hike in the Snow, you can have a Friday the 13th movie set in the winter and it works out super well because blood just spraying across the snow looks absolutely phenomenal. Make sure you get Camp Crystal Lake in there, and also versus something like the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre, let's try to make the cast of counselors that Jason is going to kill at least likable. So if you want to do the Friday the 13th 2009 thing, you know, the Platinum Dunes version of the movie where it's a modernized version of Friday the 13th, if you have those simple tenets and don't work in all of these weird plot points like Jason being a pot farmer, for example, that would work really well. But also the opportunity is there to do something like Halloween 2018 and make it a sequel to Jason Lives. Bring back Tom Matthews as Tommy Jarvis like all these other fan films have done in a really successful way. There's a ton of different options here and I feel like any of them would work just fine. I have a feeling they'd start from scratch, at least keep the lore from the first 3 movies and cut off everything else. As much as people like Tommy Jarvis, that character hasn't really caught on in the same way outside of the Friday the 13th core fan base in the same way someone like Laurie Strode has with the Halloween fan base. Like Jamie Lee Curtis has that star power, which I'm not saying Tom Matthews is not a star. He's just not equivalent in the public eye to someone like Jamie Lee Curtis. That's a reason I think they would probably go with something new versus doing a sequel to Jason Lives, but they could also bring back that character in a way that's sort of like Halloween 2018, where they cut out different movies from the past and just come up with a new storyline for this character. I don't know. Like I said, there's a ton of options options here. This is a little different for me than Halloween was because I'm a huge Jason fan. I love watching Jason murder people in movies, but I'm not super connected to the ins and outs of the various plot lines. Like, I've seen all the movies. I have the Scream Factory box set. I love just throwing them on and watching them any day of the week. It's super fun to watch while I'm editing. But if they don't end up sticking with the Tommy Jarvis plotline, for example, I'm not going to be super beat up over it like some fans were when they got rid of the Laurie being Michael's sister plotline and all of the stuff in Halloween 2. As for who I would want to direct this, David Gordon Green, he's busy with the Exorcist trilogy over at Universal. He's also apparently rebooting Hellraiser for Warner Brothers in some fashion, so I think he's a little too busy for this. Mike Flanagan has been someone who I think was on record saying they wanted to direct Halloween at one point. I think he could do a really good job with Friday the 13th. I'd love to see that. The Pierce brothers, who are the sons of the guy who did a lot of the makeup on the Evil Dead movies, they did a movie called The Wretched, which is one of my favorite, most underrated horror movies ever. I'd love to see them take on Friday the 13th. Those guys are masters of practical effects. I think they could do something great. Of course, Mike Dougherty, who already has that Warner Brothers connection, he would be an incredible guy to work on Friday the 13th. Trick or Treat's one of my favorite movies of all time. Honestly, the sky's the limit. Like Adam Wingard, who's working on Godzilla vs. Kong right now, the sequel to that, I would love to see what he can do. David F. Sandberg, once he's done with Shazam! Fury of the Gods, he could come back to horror and work on Friday the 13th. Like, again, the sky is the limit here. This could be really cool. Halloween Ends wrapping up, saying it's going to be the end of the franchise, which I fully don't believe. I'm just excited that everything is working out timing wise here, where we're going to be able to transition seemingly into something new with Friday the 13th. And I know there's got to be something going on with A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, which is absolutely incredible because we've heard that Wes Craven's estate is also taking pitches on new TV shows or movies in that universe. So yeah, the slasher renaissance is finally starting up. I thought this was going to happen with Halloween 2018. I mean, we got some stuff like Chucky in between, but there hasn't really been a huge return of slashers in a way that I thought Halloween 2018 would usher that in. And if I'm Malek Akkad and I'm sitting there seeing Halloween Ends, right, is supposedly the end of my franchise, and then all of these other big players are coming back in like Jason and Freddy, I am spinning Halloween back up immediately. Because you know what they say, a rising tide raises all ships. There is definitely room for all of these franchises, whether it's Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, or Halloween. Halloween covers the fall, Scream takes January, Friday the 13th takes the summer. Nightmare on Elm Street could basically come out anytime throughout the year and it would totally slay, I think. I don't know. I just want to see these movies because they're what I grew up with. Even though they're before my time as someone who was born in the 90s, these are the movies I grew up watching every year on AMC Fear Fest. And now, every time a new Blu-ray set comes up, I buy these movies because I miss them. I miss slashers where practical effects were a focus and just the bad guy was who you were there to see. That's why I like Halloween. That's why I like Friday the 13th. That's obviously why I like Scream and A Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm excited these are coming back. But yeah, man, if this turns out to be true, they better get Kane Hodder to come back for at least a couple movies to play Jason.